Modern world history test. Question 1. Compare and contrast the two leading ideologies of the Cold War. The answer. During the Cold War, the United States was based upon nationalism and democracy, while the Soviet Union was based upon communism and dictatorship. 2. Was the Cold War really a Cold War? Explain and provide evidence. The Cold War was a larger conflict between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. It was called Cold because the U.S. and the Soviet Union did not fight each other directly, but engaged in a war of threats. Number 3. What was the containment policy? Was it effective? Containment was a geopolitical, strategic foreign policy pursued by the United States during the Cold War to prevent the spread of communism after the end of World War II. The policy of containment had failed politically. Not only had the USA failed to stop Vietnam falling to communism, but their actions in the neighboring countries of Laos and Cambodia had helped to bring communist governments to power there too. Many U.S. politicians were mounting pressure to commit to peace. 4. With the reference to country, assess the social impact on a country from the Cold War. Answer: Afghanistan. During the Cold War, both the U.S. and the Soviet Union sought to gain footholds in Afghanistan, first through infrastructure investments and then military intervention. Once they withdrew in the late 1980s, the country entered a civil war. There you go, continuing into the rise of the Taliban. Wait, where's your answer, Jeff? With reference to a country, assess the social impact on a country from the Cold War. Answer: China. The social impacts on China because of the Cold War were the deaths of millions of people because of the Great Famine, as well as changes in laws and culture. 5. 2 examples of a proxy war in the Cold War. Brief answer: Korean War and Vietnam. Brief evidence: Vietnam is a classic proxy war with the Viet Cong substituting for the Soviet bloc and the U.S. providing aid and air support, bombing to a puppet regime. The West, the United Kingdom, and the U.S., supported by the United Nations, supported South Korea, while Communist China and the Soviet Union supported North Korea. The Korean War ended 3 years later with millions of casualties. Vietnam is a classic proxy war with Viet Cong substituting for the Soviet bloc and the U.S. providing aid and air support, bombing to a puppet regime. Brief reasoning: these are examples of a proxy war because a proxy war is when you help fight a war without being in it. For example, giving aid. This means both Vietnam and Korea were being used to fight a war of ideologies. The West, the United States recently. Okay, the West, the United Kingdom, and the U.S. supported by the United Nations, South Korea. Oh wait, fuck. You didn't delete this. Reasoning. These are an example of a proxy war. Oh, you didn't delete this either. 7. What were the effects on any of the following in their countries? A. Labor unrest in Poland. B. Velvet Revolution. C. Fall of the Berlin Wall. Our answers will be the Velvet Revolution and the fall of the Berlin Wall. Answer for the Berlin Wall is the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 laid the groundwork for new institutions, new states, and in some cases, new conflicts. In the more than 3 decades since Germany's reunification and the collapse of the Soviet Union, the European Union has taken shape, but suffered growing pains along the way. Answer: Velvet Revolution. Within months, he implemented governmental and economic reforms and allowed citizens increased freedom of speech, included freedom of the press. The people of Czechoslovakia embraced the changes in the period of Dubček's liberalism became known as Prague Spring and ended with the rule of communism in the country. What was the 2 main causes of the Cold War? Brief answer: the Potsdam Conference, where the Soviets found out that the U.S. made an atomic bomb behind their back, and the difference in ideology, and the USSR was left to fight by itself against Nazis. 8. What was one reason the Cold War ended? Answer: When the Berlin Wall came down, borders opened, free elections ousted the communist regimes everywhere in Eastern Europe. This caused the fall of the USSR and lifted the Iron Curtains when the Cold War came to an end.